The sound that changed our home forever wasn't a shout or a slammed door. It was the soft slap of a sponge dropping into the sink and the quiet that followed. The kitchen smelled like lemon soap and garlic from the roasted chicken we'd finished, and the faucet hummed a steady line like a lullaby trying to keep the peace. William leaned against the counter and studied me with the kind of stillness people use right before they deliver bad news. My hands were damp from drying plates. I remember that because the dish almost slipped when he said we needed to talk about Chloe. He said it calmly, as if calm could make it reasonable. Behind him, the window had gone mirror dark, showing our reflections instead of the little courtyard beyond. I watched my own face go pale in that glass, and I understood that whatever came next would not be softened by the hum of water. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and tap like and subscribe if you want more true family justice stories, because some choices define us and some ultimatums show us exactly who we're standing next to. My name is Carla, and I grew up in a neighborhood where people knew who you belonged to by your last name and where you sat in church. My father worked 2 jobs and still found time to coach my little brother's baseball team. My mother ironed everything: shirts, napkins, even pillowcases, because in our house, care lived in the details. I married young, learned fast, and when the marriage ended, I promised myself 2 things: that my daughter would never wonder where she ranked in my life, and that I would build something steady with my own 2 hands. I keep a color-coded calendar, pack lunches at night, and pay bills the day they arrive. Order is how I breathe. I met William at a charity 5K. My office sponsored the kind of event where folding tables wobble under bottled water and bananas. He ran beside me the last mile, made me laugh when my side cramped, and asked for my number with a grin that felt like a little summer. He sent good morning texts, carried heavy boxes when I moved to a sunnier apartment, and showed up with a toolkit the first evening my garbage disposal groaned. He learned Chloe's favorite pizza order and the week she preferred at my place because of her school projects, and for a while I thought we were building something uncomplicated and kind. Stability has a way of making you bold enough to dream. Chloe is 14 and sharp in the way girls get when they've learned to read a room before the adults do. She keeps a messy ponytail and writes snarky notes on sticky paper she tucks into my purse. Little things like, "You're doing great," Mom with a doodled cat in sunglasses. She spends most of her time with her dad Daniel, who is steady as a metronome and knows exactly how to talk to a frightened stranger in the back of an ambulance. The arrangement works school nights at his alternating weekends and half the holidays at mine, and a group chat where the 3 of us swap bus schedules and photo proof that the cat did in fact knock over the fern. It isn't perfect, but it is ours, and it keeps Chloe's world from wobbling. When William moved in after 2 years of dating, the apartment shifted in small, agreeable ways. He installed a stronger showerhead and hung the framed print of the lake we visited one fall when the trees looked like they were on fire. He made pasta on Fridays and bragged that he was converting me to al dente the right way, and I let him, because sometimes love is letting someone teach you their favorite thing. We set a quiet ritual for Chloe's weekend's board games after dinner, devices face down, everyone forced to laugh at each other's terrible jokes. I watched him watch us the way some men do when they've never had a real routine with a child, curious and cautious, wanting to belong. The first hairline crack came in a comment so light, I could have pretended it was a joke. Chloe had left her sneakers by the door after a late movie, and William tripped on them in the dark, cursing under his breath before he flicked on the hall light. "Would be nice," he said, "if we knew what to expect around here. Some weeks feel like a dorm." I apologized, nudged the shoes into the closet, and told myself we were all still learning. He smiled, kissed my cheek, and for a moment it wasn't a problem at all. That is the trick of small things. If you squint, they pass for nothing. Spring found a comfortable rhythm work school, grocery runs, and the music of ordinary messes until that Tuesday evening when the dishes were clean and the house felt gentle. Chloe had gone back to her dad's 2 nights earlier, and the living room looked like a magazine page throw blanket, folded candles unlit no shoes by the door. I dried the last plate and set it in the cabinet, turned, and caught William watching me with that same prelude stillness. The screen over the sink rattled in a mild breeze, and somewhere outside, a car door thumped shut. He said my daughter's name again, like a topic that kept interrupting our lives, and placed the sponge on the edge of the sink with the care of someone about to argue his way into a corner. He wanted to talk, he said, about weekends and boundaries, about feeling like a visitor in a life he'd moved into. He wrapped it in soft words and tidy phrases, as if polite grammar could make an ugly idea pretty. There are moments when you can feel a string being pulled through the fabric of your piece, slow at first, then steady, like the hem will give, whether you consent or not. I wiped my hands on the towel and looked at the man I had made room for, the home I had worked for, and the calendar that tells me who my life belongs to. The faucet dripped once, twice, like the kitchen itself was counting. He took a breath, the kind people take when they've practiced what comes next in the car, and then he said what some men say when they mistake love for ownership and stability for a stage they can rearrange to suit themselves. I didn't answer, not yet. I set the towel down and felt the line I would not cross settle like a bar of iron in my chest. Out in the courtyard, a neighbor's porch light flicked on, and the reflection in the window showed my face, steadying, not hard, not cruel, just decided. That was the last soft minute before I learned what he was truly willing to ask of me. The moment I heard William's voice harden, I knew there would be no soft way through. He wasn't asking for a discussion, not really. He was laying down a verdict, and in his mind, it was already decided. "You need to choose," he said, and though his words were measured, they landed like a door slamming in a quiet house. My throat tightened. He wasn't talking about paint colors or vacation plans, he was talking about my daughter. I set the towel aside and tried to steady myself. "She's 14, I said, carefully. "Teenagers test limits. That's part of growing up." I thought reason might cool him, but his face stayed rigid. "No," he snapped. "Don't make excuses for her. She ignores me. She undermines me, and you always take her side. I'm tired of being treated like a visitor in my own home." His words came sharp, everyone clipped, as though Chloe and I had conspired to keep him on the outside. The kitchen felt smaller shadows pressing in from the corners. "William, she's my daughter. You're my partner. There's no competition here," I said, trying to find him in the fog of his resentment. But his jaw stayed locked eyes, burning with a frustration that had nothing to do with spilled shoes or noisy weekends. Then came the sentence that stripped away every doubt. "Either she stops coming here, or I'm gone. Visit her at Daniel's if you want, but I won't live like this anymore." For a heartbeat, the world stilled. My chest tightened until I could barely draw breath. A man I had trusted, a man I had allowed into the quiet spaces of my life, had just asked me to push my child to the margins so he could feel comfortable. I stared at him, searching for a glimmer of the man who once ran beside me on a sunlit path and cheered when I crossed the finish line. But all I saw was a stranger demanding I trade blood for companionship. The answer came clear and immediate. "You're right," I whispered, and his shoulders eased as though he believed he had won. A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, relief breaking through his scowl. "Thank you," he murmured. "I knew you'd see reason." But I was already moving past him, walking into the bedroom where his suits hung in neat rows. I pulled his suitcase from the closet, the zipper catching as I dragged it onto the bed. His footsteps faltered at the doorway. "Carla, what are you doing?" His voice cracked on my name. My hands stayed steady, folding his shirts, laying them with methodical precision into the case. "Making the choice," I said calmly. "You were right, someone has to leave, but it won't be my daughter." Panic twisted his features. "Stop," he stammered. That's not what I meant. But my hands moved faster, pulling his side of the closet bare. You gave me an ultimatum, I told him. I'm answering it. His tone turned desperate, breaking in places I had never heard before. Please, Carla, we can fix this. Don't throw us away over boundaries. I spun to face him, arms full of shirts. Boundaries, I echoed. You asked me to erase my child from her own home. That isn't a boundary. That's betrayal. He stared at me, mouth working without sound, like a man caught underwater and searching for air. Where am I supposed to go? He finally muttered, voice thin. I dropped the bundle into the suitcase and zipped it closed. Not my problem. You have family. Call them. For the next hour I packed while he hovered between anger and pleading. He tried shouting, then crying, then twisting the story until Chloe was the manipulator and I was blind. The absurdity of it nearly made me laugh. She was 14, sharp and stubborn, yes, but not a schemer. No, the schemer was standing in front of me. By 10 o'clock, the bag sat by the door. William slumped on the couch, red-eyed phone pressed to his ear. I caught his sister Meredith's voice faint through the receiver, sharp with concern. She's throwing me out, he told her, voice thick with self-pity. All over that bratty kid. That word, bratty, sent heat rushing through me. I strode over, plucked the phone from his hand, and spoke evenly. Meredith, come pick up your brother. He needs a place to stay. Her alarm crackled down the line. Carla, what's happening? I didn't waver. Your brother demanded I choose between him and my daughter. I chose. Now come get him. I ended the call before she could protest. William's glare burned into me, cheeks wet, voice shaking. You're making a huge mistake. I straightened, heart pounding, but steady. The mistake was believing I could build a future with someone who would ask me to abandon my child. This is the correction. Meredith arrived 40 minutes later, headlights cutting across the courtyard, her face tight with judgment as she stepped inside. She barely glanced at the packed suitcase before turning her disapproval on me. Marriage is about compromise, she lectured. You can't just throw him away like this. I cut her off, my voice sharp as glass. If someone asked you to choose between them and your children, what would you do? Her mouth snapped shut. She had 3 of her own. She didn't answer. They left together, suitcase in hand, Meredith bristling with indignation. At the door, William paused, eyes burning with a fury that made the air shift. You'll regret this, Carla. My reply was quiet, but it carried. The only thing I regret is not seeing you clearly sooner. I shut the door and turned the lock, the bolt sliding into place with finality. The next morning, I changed the locks completely. He had never been on the lease. It was my apartment long before him. Yet as I slid the new key onto my ring, a chill threaded through my spine. His parting words clung to me, echoing in the stillness. You'll regret this. The rooms felt heavier, quieter, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I told myself I had done the right thing, the only thing. Protecting Chloe was never a question, never a matter of weighing. But the look in William's eyes as he left told me this wasn't finished. I could sense it in the silence, like the pause before thunder. Some storms don't pass cleanly. They gather strength even after the sky clears. And though the locks were new and the door was shut, I knew in my bones that William would not disappear quietly. The first day after William left should have brought relief, but instead my apartment felt hollow, as if the walls themselves were bracing for another argument. I carried his suitcase to the door in my memory, over and over my body, remembering the weight of his shirts and shoes, even though they were gone. The air felt sharp, and I kept hearing his final words echoing in the quiet. I told myself I had made the only choice I could, but fear laced through the certainty like threads pulled too tight in fabric. 2 days later, the texts began. At first, they were soft, almost apologetic little messages, saying he had been tired, stressed, that he hadn't meant what he said. He wrote about loving Chloe, about wanting balance, as if rewriting history could undo what had already been spoken. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking, remembering the tone of his voice when he told me to choose. That wasn't exhaustion. That was who he was. I typed a single line back. "You ask me to cut my daughter out of my life. That isn't something I can forgive." His reply came instantly, trying to dismiss it as drama, insisting we should talk. I set the phone down, breathing through the rush of anger. Some doors, once closed, must stay closed. By the weekend, his apologies had soured into demands. He started listing things he believed were his: the sofa, the kitchen mixer, even a few framed photos. He had contributed $300 toward a couch that cost more than 8 times that amount, and he called it half his. The mixer, he said, was a gift to us both, though it had been mine before he ever moved in. I texted back offering to return his money, but he wasn't interested in fairness. He wanted a reason to stay tethered to me, to linger in arguments long after the love had died. The real blow came on Sunday evening when my phone rang, Daniel's name lighting the screen. His voice carried that edge of disbelief I knew too well. "You'll never guess who just called me," he said, and before I could answer, he told me William had reached out. My stomach dropped. William had suggested Chloe stay with him full time until things between William and me settled down. He framed it as if he cared about stability, but what he wanted was distance between me and my own daughter. I gripped the phone until my knuckles ached. Then Daniel told me Chloe had been in the room. He had put William on speaker, and she heard everything. My heart stopped. Daniel said she had taken the phone herself and told William clearly, "My mom already chose. She chose me. Get over it." And then she hung up. A laugh burst from me, part pride, part grief. My daughter shouldn't have to defend herself to a grown man, yet she had spoken with a strength that steadied me. That night, I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at Chloe's photo on the nightstand, the one with her braces flashing as she held a kitten. My whisper filled the room. "You'll always come first, baby girl. Always." But fear twisted through me. If William could try to turn Daniel against me, what else might he attempt? The apartment no longer felt safe. Even with the new locks, I half expected his shadow behind every corner. By Monday, the pressure came from another direction. Meredith called her tone carefully measured, as if she were the voice of reason. "William didn't mean it," she insisted. "You've been together for years. You can't throw that away." I cut her off. "He asked me to ban my daughter from her own home. That isn't a misunderstanding." Her voice sharpened, losing the false calm. "You're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. Relationships require compromise." The laugh that escaped me was bitter. "Compromise?" I asked. "You think I should compromise on my child?" Her silence was brief, then she muttered, "You'll regret this," and hung up. The words echoed in my ears until nightfall. Sleep came slow and shallow. Every sound of the refrigerator, every groan of the pipes pressed against my nerves. I kept hearing William's last warning, the one he had flung at me as he left with his suitcase. "You'll regret this." It lingered like a bruise. I recognized something in his tone that night. It wasn't the heat of a breakup or the bitterness of disappointment. It was a promise of war. Midweek, his mother Patricia called me from an unfamiliar number. Her voice was syrupy, practiced as though she had rehearsed each word. She called me sweetheart, spoke about one little disagreement, and suggested I had overreacted. I told her plainly. He asked me to cut my daughter out of my life. That isn't a little disagreement. Her mask slipped. She talked about how when she married William's father, his children from his first marriage knew their place and didn't intrude. The word intrude pierced through me. You mean exist, I told her, and those children don't speak to him anymore, do they? Maybe ask yourself why. Silence cracked on the line, followed by her sputtered outrage. I ended the call before her words could poison me further. By Friday, my cousin Claire sent screenshots from Facebook. William had taken his story public writing posts about narcissistic partners and being forced to compete with the past. He called step-parents the real victims, and beneath a brooding photo he wrote, "Sometimes love means being pushed aside for someone else's baggage." My chest burned, reading the comments. His friends offered sympathy, telling him he deserved better, while he replied, "Exactly, thank you for understanding." It's so hard when the past keeps intruding. He had turned Chloe into baggage, our life into a burden he had bravely endured. Claire added a note, Team Chloe all the way. He's making himself look like a fool. I appreciated her faith, but I knew how words spread. Lies once planted online take root, creeping into places you can't always see. I shut my phone off and let it buzz in the dark, unwilling to watch the performance he staged for strangers. That weekend, fate put Meredith and me face to face outside the grocery store. She stood leaning against her car, arms crossed, waiting for me as though she had planned the encounter. "We need to stop this nonsense," she said coldly. I bristled. "This isn't nonsense. Your brother tried to erase my daughter." She shook her head, lips curling with disdain. "You've always been dramatic." He was frustrated. "You should have listened, not overreacted." My laugh was sharp. "So I should have agreed. Sure, William, my daughter will disappear, so you feel more secure?" Meredith's mouth twisted. "You're turning the whole family against him. You're broadcasting this circus." I snapped back. "He's the one posting sob stories online." She had no answer, only a mutter as she stalked away. "You'll regret this." That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Chloe, takeout boxes between us, her ponytail swaying as she told me about a school project. I kept looking at her, at the brightness in her eyes, at the way she laughed, without knowing how close the shadows were. She was still a child caught in a storm of adult bitterness, and William had dared to label her baggage. I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "You're the best part of my life," I told her. She grinned, cheeks flushed from soda. "I know, Mom." Her confidence steadied me, but unease lingered like a draft under the door. Even as I tucked her into bed later, I caught myself staring at the dark window blinds drawn tight. Somewhere beyond that glass, I felt William circling, plotting his next move. His mother's voice, his sister's threats, his posts online, they weren't the end. They were the opening notes of something larger. And deep inside, I knew the silence pressing against our home was only the pause before the next strike. The week after Meredith cornered me outside the grocery store, William shifted from whispers to open shows of force. It began on a Monday morning when the pounding at my front door rattled the frame hard enough to make the pictures on the wall tilt. His voice carried through the wood, demanding I let him in, claiming he needed to collect his belongings. When I slid the chain across and cracked the door an inch, I saw not only him, but two unfamiliar men standing at his side, each holding a box, as if prepared to move him back in. "You already have everything that belongs to you," I said, flatly, my eyes flicking from their arms to William's smug expression. He rattled off items, my mixer-old photo albums, even a suit jacket from a wedding that never happened, as though speaking them aloud could make them his. One of the strangers puffed out his chest, posturing, while William announced they were there to ensure things went smoothly. I tightened the chain and pulled my phone from my pocket. "Then your friends can wait with you at the police station when I call this in as attempted entry." My voice was calm, but my hand shook as I dialed. The three of them backed away before I could finish the report, William's shoe leaving a dent in the door where he had tried to wedge it open. 2 days later, my building manager knocked her silver hair pinned neat, and her expression kind but troubled. She explained a complaint had come in that a child was heard crying for hours inside my apartment and neighbors were concerned about neglect. My body flooded with heat. That's a lie, I told her. She nodded, lowering her voice. I know Carla. Off the record, it was William. He asked for a safety check. Her eyes softened. He's been seen loitering in the lot taking pictures of license plates. People are nervous. When she left, I stood by the window pulling the blinds just enough to see. His car was parked across the street, close enough to remind me he was there far enough to avoid the tow. By Friday evening, Chloe returned from Daniel's unusually quiet, her shoulders stiff as she handed me her phone. My heart sank as I read the long, syrupy messages William had sent. He told her none of this was her fault, that he missed her, and that maybe they could meet for lunch without telling me. My vision blurred with rage, but I forced my voice steady. Did you answer him? I asked. Chloe lifted her chin, eyes flashing. I told him to stop, or I'd report him, then I blocked him. Pride swelled through my chest, even as fear knotted in my stomach. I called Daniel immediately, and his fury matched my own. He's crossed too many lines. My lawyer will handle this, he promised. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just my problem anymore. William was dragging all of us into his obsession. The breaking point came the next morning at the grocery store. Chloe and I were halfway down the cereal aisle when a voice rang out, all forced surprise. Carla, what a coincidence! I turned, and there stood William Meredith beside him, both smiling as though they had stumbled upon us by chance. But this wasn't anywhere near her neighborhood, and the timing was too sharp. His gaze slid past me to Chloe. Hi, sweetie. You look so grown up. She froze, then squared her shoulders. Please, leave us alone. His face softened with false hurt. I know you're upset, but... She cut him off, her voice clear. You tried to make my mom get rid of me. The only one hurt here is you. Meredith's voice cracked across the aisle. Don't be rude to adults, young lady. I stepped forward, fury blazing. Don't talk to my daughter, either of you. William lifted his chin. It's a public place. I can speak if I want. And if you make a scene, I'll call security. Chloe's hand gripped mine tightly as I pulled her past them, abandoning our cart. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw Meredith raise her phone, snapping photos as we left. Hours later, I understood why. William posted the pictures online, framing me as a mother who used her child as a weapon. His caption painted himself as the victim begging for closure. But this time, the comments turned. People questioned why he had told me to choose why he was following us into stores. This is creepy, William, one person wrote. By evening, the post was gone, quietly deleted. Still, the damage lingered. Each escalation left a new scar, each tactic tightening the siege around my home and family. That night, as I tucked Chloe in, I couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was still gathering. William wasn't satisfied with shadows or whispers anymore. He had shown his face in the cereal aisle, bold as daylight, and even when strangers turned against him, he only doubled down. I kissed my daughter's forehead and whispered goodnight, but my eyes kept drifting to the darkened window beyond her room. Something told me the worst had not yet arrived, and when it did, it would come crashing through the very door I had fought so hard to keep shut. The lawsuit came in a thick envelope dropped on my doorstep late on a Tuesday night, the kind of paper that carries the weight of both ink and threat. I sat at the kitchen table while Chloe worked on her homework across from me, the lamp throwing light across the stamped seal. $30,000 in damages, it read a claim for unlawful eviction and emotional distress. My hands trembled as I turned each page, my daughter's pencil scratching softly on the other side of the table, her world filled with equations while mine filled with accusations. William wasn't just knocking on my door anymore. He was trying to rewrite the story in a courtroom. I called my attorney, David Hayes, the next morning. He had helped me once before during my divorce and carried a sharpness behind his quiet smile. When I explained the situation, he chuckled without humor. He was never on the lease, Carla. He left with his sister and took his belongings willingly. He has no case. My chest loosened for the first time in days. David leaned forward over his desk. If anything, we should consider filing a countersuit for harassment. The text to Chloe, the false reports, the stalking, you have more than enough. The thought of fighting back instead of only defending sent a steady current through me. Do it, I said firmly. File whatever you need to. He doesn't get to keep pulling us into his storm without consequence. I expected silence after that, but William had other plans. 2 days later, my boss called me into her office, her voice carrying that tightness that made my stomach knot before I even sat down. We received a complaint, she said carefully. It claims you're unstable, that your personal life is interfering with your work. My throat went dry. She lowered her voice. The email wasn't signed, but it included details only someone close to you would know. My heart sank. She explained that the company's IT traced it back to a downtown coffee shop. Security footage showed Meredith at a laptop during the exact time the message was sent. My boss gave me a reassuring smile. HR has documented it. If it happens again, we'll treat it as harassment. We're on your side, Carla. Relief washed over me, though. Underneath was a hot anger that Meredith had carried her brother's battle into my livelihood. That Thursday evening, I returned from work and noticed the front door ajar. My pulse hammered as I stepped inside, every instinct screaming. In the living room stood William, his mother Patricia, and a man I didn't recognize, each of them standing with a strange kind of entitlement. The spare key, I realized too late that I had left it hidden in the fake rock under the porch. William's smile was triumphant. You thought you could lock me out, but you can't erase me from this home, he said. Patricia folded her arms, her voice sickly sweet. Carla, darling, this has gone too far. We've brought Pastor Raymond to mediate an intervention. The pastor, tall and self-important, stepped forward with a practiced calm. We're here to help you see reason, he said. Marriage is sacred. Families work through hardships. William deserves a chance to rebuild. My laugh came sharp, more like a bark. This isn't marriage. He tried to force me to abandon my child. That is not family. William's face twisted, desperation showing beneath his bravado. You're destroying us, Carla. We can fix this if you stop being stubborn. I pulled my phone from my purse and held it up. You have 10 seconds to leave before I call the police. Patricia shrieked, her voice rising. You're putting a child before your vows. My thumb hovered over the keypad. 5 seconds, I counted. William's voice cracked. Carla, please, we can go to counseling. Pastor Raymond added his plea, but my thumb pressed the call button. Yes, I said clearly to the dispatcher. I have 3 trespassers in my home. That got them moving, but not fast enough. The officers arrived within minutes, catching them mid-escape. I showed them my lease, the updated locks, and William's ID still listed at Meredith's address. He hadn't even changed his information since moving in. The officers cuffed them for trespassing the site, almost surreal after so many weeks of whispered threats. As they were being led out, William twisted against the officer's grip and shouted, You can't do this! I'm going to be a father! The words sliced the air in two. The officers glanced at me. Chloe had stepped into the hallway and froze mid-step. My chest went cold, then hot with fury. That's impossible, I said loudly. I had surgery years ago, and we haven't been intimate in months. One of the female officers snorted. Nice try, buddy. William stammered, his face pale. I meant she was pregnant, but she miscarried from all the stress. I stared at him. Which is it, William? Pregnant or miscarried? You can't even keep your lies straight. Patricia started screaming about lawsuits while the pastor looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. The officers shoved them toward the patrol car, their drama unraveling with every step. The next morning, David filed for a restraining order, and it was granted immediately. When I called him with the update, he told me William's own lawyer had dropped him. You can't sue for unlawful eviction while simultaneously breaking into her apartment, David said, almost laughing. He's destroyed his own credibility. The charges would likely be pled down, but the record would remain, and the restraining order carried weight. William couldn't talk his way around. That evening, Chloe curled beside me on the couch, her head heavy on my shoulder. Mom, she whispered. He's not going to stop, is he? I kissed the top of her hair. He can't hurt us anymore. Not legally, not personally. He tried, and he failed. Still, as I looked out the window and saw the shadows stretching across the courtyard, I wondered if William's storm had truly passed, or if this was only the eye quiet before the next wave. The silence in my apartment was different after that night. It wasn't heavy or suffocating anymore. It felt clean, almost new. I could walk from room to room without flinching at every sound, and Chloe's laughter filled the corners again. Yet I knew William's pattern. He would flail, twist the story, and paint himself as the victim until he had nowhere left to turn. And I had to be ready when that moment came. The restraining order should have been the end, yet I knew William well enough to expect the opposite. When a man like him feels the walls closing in, he doesn't stop. He thrashes. And sure enough, the flailing began almost immediately. Within a week, he was back online, casting himself as the wounded party. His posts grew darker, dripping with words like survivor and betrayal. He wrote about being forced away from the woman he loved, about parental alienation, about fighting to be heard. At first, his friends responded with the same sympathy they had always given him, urging him to stay strong. But the questions came quickly after. Why are there police reports against you? Someone asked beneath one of his photos. Why are you texting a child behind her mother's back? Another demanded. The tide shifted, and soon most of his words vanished from the page, deleted as quickly as he posted them. Patricia, however, was less willing to fade. She called once, her voice crackling with anger through the phone. You've ruined my son's life, she said, fury pouring into every syllable. I reminded her calmly that her fingerprints were on the trespassing report too, that she had been cuffed beside him. The silence on the other end was sharp before she hung up. Meredith's defiance lasted longer. She sent me a message weeks later, short and cold. William is staying with Mom now. He's broken. Hope you're happy. I read it twice, my thumb hovering over the screen, then set the phone down without responding. Happiness didn't come from his downfall. It came from the quiet safety I was finally carving back into my home. The court date for the restraining order extension arrived on a gray morning. David sat beside me at the long oak table, his presence steady while William slumped across from us, looking smaller than I remembered. The judge listened to the evidence, each piece laid out in clean order. The texts to Chloe, the false reports to my building manager, the grocery store, ambush, the break-in, even the lie about pregnancy, it all stacked higher and higher until the judge's expression turned to disgust. When she spoke, her voice carried no room for doubt. The restraining order would stand. William's lawyer, the second one he had hired, barely argued. When the gavel struck, David leaned toward me and whispered, "He's finished." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For the first time, I felt the weight shifting off my chest. But William, true to form, could not let silence rest. He tried again on social media fishing for sympathy in new circles. This time, though, his words drew suspicion rather than support. Strangers asked bluntly why he had been arrested, why he was showing up uninvited at a woman's apartment, why his own daughter wanted nothing to do with him. His posts disappeared within hours, shame erasing them faster than he could write. The mask had slipped too far. At home, the air grew lighter. I no longer jumped at every sound in the hallway. I could cook dinner without glancing toward the window, certain of shadows that weren't there. Chloe's laughter returned to its natural rhythm, filling the rooms again. One Saturday morning, she padded into the kitchen, hair wild from sleep, and wrapped her arms around my waist while I flipped pancakes. "You chose me," she murmured. My throat tightened spatula, pausing midair. "There was never a choice to make, baby girl," I whispered back. She grinned and slid into her chair. "Mom, you make the best pancakes, even if William said they were too sweet." I laughed, the sound shaking free tension I hadn't realized I was still holding. "Then I'll add extra syrup just to spite him." Spring break came, and instead of lawyers and police calls, Chloe and I packed a tent, sleeping bags, and marshmallows. We drove to a quiet campsite beneath a wide sky where the air smelled like pine and the crackle of a campfire replaced the constant hum of anxiety. One night, as the firelight flickered against her face, she said softly, "Mom, you're stronger than I thought." I smiled faintly, poking the flames with a stick. "So are you." She leaned against me, her voice firm. "We're a team, right?" I kissed the top of her head. Always a team. In the stillness of those woods, with Chloe's steady breathing beside me, I realized the truth that had been building all along. William had tried to define my life with ultimatums, manipulation, and fear. He had demanded I choose thinking he could win by drawing lines through my family. But in the end, he only revealed himself for what he truly was: disposable. When someone asks you to put them above your child, they've already told you they're not worth keeping. Back home, the silence was no longer heavy. It was peace, and for the first time in months, I believed the storm had passed. But even as the calm settled, I knew the story wasn't over. Justice had been served in the courtroom, yet life has a way of testing the ground after every quake. My dignity was mine again, my daughter safe. But the lesson remained sharp in my chest. When a man threatens to erase what matters most, the only way forward is to stand taller than the storm. The weeks that followed our camping trip brought a calm I hadn't felt in months. The restraining order stood firm, and William's lawyer had abandoned him. He had run out of legal maneuvers, leaving him to grasp for scraps of sympathy online. Each attempt fizzled faster than the last. His words no longer carried weight. They crumbled under the weight of police reports, screenshots, and court orders. The friends who once cheered for him had grown quiet, their silence louder than any support he could have begged for. At first, he tried to twist his story into something noble. He posted about being a victim of parental alienation, about loving a woman who chose her child over their future. He leaned on words like sacrifice and betrayal, hoping someone would see him as a martyr. But the comments turned sharp. People asked why he had been caught trying to enter my apartment, why he was messaging a 14-year-old behind her mother's back, why the police had been called more than once. I watched from a distance, never replying, only saving the evidence when necessary. His words disappeared almost as quickly as they appeared deleted when they didn't bring him the validation he craved. Patricia, still unwilling to let go, called me again. Her voice was full of fury. "You've ruined my son's life," she spat. I held the phone steady and reminded her that she had been there too, standing in my apartment without permission, her wrists cuffed by the same officers. "You're lucky the judge didn't push harder," I told her. The line went quiet before she hung up, her anger silenced by the truth she couldn't refute. Meredith's tone was different when her message came. It was short, typed out late one night. William is staying with Mom now. He's broken. Hope you're happy. I read it twice, then set the phone down. There was nothing left to say. Happiness didn't come from his ruin. It came from knowing my daughter could laugh without fear, from walking into my own kitchen without expecting shadows behind the door. The day the court extended the restraining order permanently, I felt the shift in my bones. David laid the paperwork across the table, his voice steady. This will follow him wherever he goes. He won't be able to touch you legally again. I traced the seal with my finger, letting the weight of it settle. For months, William had tried to control the narrative, painting himself as the victim while circling me like a hawk. Now the law itself had spoken, and it was his turn to carry the stain of his own choices. At home, Chloe sensed the change. She moved with a lighter step, her smile easier, her jokes spilling faster than I could keep up. One Saturday morning, she joined me in the kitchen, her hair sticking up in wild tufts. I flipped pancakes, and she slid into her chair with a grin. "You chose me," she murmured. My throat tightened, and I nearly dropped the spatula. There was never a choice, baby girl. "You always come first." She laughed and drizzled too much syrup onto her plate, teasing me about how William once complained the pancakes were too sweet. "Then I'll add extra syrup," I told her, and we both laughed until the sound filled the room. The sweetness of that morning was simple, but it carried more strength than all of William's chaos. He had tried to pit us against each other, to wedge himself into the space between mother and daughter, and in the end, he had only tightened our bond. Chloe no longer whispered her fears before bed. She leaned against me without hesitation, certain of where she belonged. But William's collapse didn't only affect us. Patricia's standing in her church faltered after word spread of the trespassing arrest. Neighbors, who once admired her devotion, whispered about the choices she had made about the pastor she had dragged into a scheme that ended with flashing lights outside my building. Meredith, too, found her edges fraying. The email she sent to my employer had been traced back to her, documented by HR, her name marked in files she couldn't erase. I hadn't needed to confront them further. They had exposed themselves, and now they carried the weight of it wherever they went. One evening, I walked Chloe home from a friend's house. The air was crisp, and she talked about a science project with her usual animation. As we turned the corner toward our apartment, I caught sight of William's car parked blocks away, his silhouette barely visible behind the wheel. But this time, I didn't freeze. I lifted my phone, snapped a picture, and sent it to David. By the next morning, the judge had been notified, and William was warned that any violation of the restraining order would bring him back before the court. He disappeared from that corner and never returned. The shift was complete. The storm had passed not with a dramatic explosion, but with the slow unraveling of his lies, each thread pulled until nothing remained. He had tried lawsuits, manipulation, public humiliation, even staged interventions. Every weapon turned back on him, leaving his credibility shattered and his family stained by their own choices. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it arrived in paperwork and silence, in the steady reclaiming of space he once tried to own. Still, I didn't fool myself into believing every battle was behind us. William was the kind of man who would spend years telling anyone who listened that he had been wronged. But he could no longer touch my life, no longer steal my peace, no longer use Chloe's name as leverage. We had survived his storm, and the ground beneath us was stronger for it. As I watched Chloe clear her plate that evening, humming softly to herself, I felt the balance shift for good. We had walked through the worst he had to offer, and we were still standing. The next chapter wasn't about him anymore. It was about us, about a home, that finally belonged to us again, and a dignity he could never take away. And yet, as the evening light dimmed and the blinds whispered against the window pane, I knew one final truth. Justice had been served, but healing was its own kind of work. The last piece of this story wasn't about William's collapse. It was about how Chloe and I would carry forward together, unshaken and unbroken. When the dust finally settled, the quiet felt different. It wasn't the strained silence of waiting for the next shoe to drop, nor the hollow echo of fear. It was clean, steady, and whole. For the first time in months, I could walk through my own apartment and breathe without the weight of shadows pressing in. The storm that William had tried to stir into every corner of my life had finally burned itself out. The restraining order held firm, and his efforts to gather sympathy collapsed under the truth. Patricia stopped calling her outrage dulled by the shame of her own arrest. Meredith's bitterness shrank into clipped hollow texts that carried no power anymore. They had tied themselves to William's downfall, and the consequences clung to them as surely as the cuffs once had. I didn't have to raise my voice or fight in the street. The law, the truth, and time had done the work for me. At home, Chloe bloomed in ways I hadn't noticed before. She laughed more easily, her shoulders loosened, and she no longer scanned the windows before pulling the blinds shut. One Saturday morning, she wrapped her arms around me in the kitchen, while I flipped pancakes, whispering again, "You chose me." I told her what I had always known: there was never a choice to be made. A mother does not weigh her child against anyone. She simply stands. Watching her smile and drown her plate in syrup, I realized that every trial, every confrontation had only deepened the bond between us. That spring, we camped under the stars, just the two of us. The firelight danced across Chloe's face, and for the first time, her words weren't edged with worry. "We're a team," she said, leaning against me, and she was right. He had tried to wedge himself between us, but instead, he only strengthened the ground we stood on. The peace I felt in those woods wasn't loud or triumphant. It was quiet, like the steady glow of embers after flames have died down, warm enough to keep the night away. Looking back now, I see William's unraveling for what it was. He thought love was control, that devotion meant erasing what mattered to me so he could stand alone in the center. When I refused, his threats grew sharper, his tactics more desperate, until he had no mask left to wear. In the end, his schemes didn't destroy me, they destroyed him. That's the truth of people who demand ultimatums that cut against love itself. They reveal who they are, and once you see it clearly, there is no going back. The lesson for me was simple, though. Living, it was not anyone who asked you to betray your child, your values, or yourself has already told you they are not worth keeping. Protecting what matters most is never selfish. It is survival. Dignity isn't loud. Sometimes it looks like folding a shirt into a suitcase, or signing a paper in a courthouse, or quietly tucking your daughter into bed while the world outside rages. Justice doesn't always arrive with a gavel or a headline. Sometimes it comes as peace in your own home, laughter echoing against the walls, and the knowledge that you held the line when it mattered most. That peace is what William could never touch, no matter how hard he tried. It belongs to me and Chloe now, and it will carry us forward. Before we close, I'd love to know which part of this journey spoke most deeply to you. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you'd like to hear more true family stories, you're welcome to stay connected here.